when I ask questions, the assumption becomes, I don't know. It doesn't become, I'm challenging your knowledge and I want you to pause and think about it. Right? And so I made those blunders a couple of times before I realized, like, oh, I really need to change the way I'm asking the question, especially to my direct reports. And so instead of just asking a question, I was like, you know what, guys, I'm going to put my coaching hat on for a second. I'm going to ask you a few questions so that we can like pause and think about how we're approaching this architecture.
I
Right?
love
And I
that.
think this applies to so many other situations, especially for women, right? Because again, our competency when we ask a question is dismissed and we were like, oh, she doesn't know what she's doing. When you know exactly what you're doing, you're the, you know, domain expert on this, like you've built the product, right? And you're handing it over to another team. You know exactly what you're doing. So that was kind of like the approach that I took as I was transitioning more into higher leadership positions.
When Nisreen told me that, I was a little bit surprised, right? Because I'm all about asking questions. I think questions are very powerful. And I was actually, started thinking about what does it mean if you ask questions and people assume you don't know. And I think the beauty of, one of the things I talk with Nisreen is how you can actually make asking questions to something much more powerful. And that, among other, are the things that we talk about in this episode. Welcome to From a Woman to a Leader. My name is Limor Bergman Gross, a former director of engineering, and I turn into executive coach for women in tech. And if you have ever felt stuck, overlooked, or like you're doing everything right but still not getting the recognition you deserve, this podcast is for you. Each episode brings real stories and practical strategies from women who have built bold, impactful careers on their own terms. If you want to grow your confidence, influence, and leadership without pretending to be someone you're not, hit subscribe and join me on Substack so you never miss an episode. Your next level starts here. Hi everyone, and today I'm speaking with Nisreen Cane. And Nisreen is a former Google leader, startup executive, and now she is a computer science professor. She's helping professionals navigate the AI era. And we talked about something that every woman in tech, I think, needs to hear. Curiosity is not a weakness. It's actually a leadership strength. And we talk about several things that, I very much relate to, and I think you will relate to as well. Like why women hesitate to ask for help, how curiosity actually builds psychological safety, how to ask questions without losing your authority, and how to lead teams without controlling them. I personally think that asking questions is a very, very powerful skills, and I feel like I'm getting better and better as I interview my guests and as I coach more women. And this episode is for you, for every woman that feels like she has to know everything. She feels uncomfortable asking for support, or feels like questioning might cost credibility. And if that's you, if you resonate with that, stay with us for this episode. I think you're going to gain a lot of insights from it. Because curiosity actually might be your most underrated leadership advantage. So are you ready? Let's dive right in. Hi, Nisreen. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Limor. How are you?
I'm pretty good. It's great. Great to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah. And we said we'll talk about curiosity, and I think this is a wonderful topic to talk about because I think it's a great principle that all of us need to implement more in our lives.
Especially at this time. I feel like at this time we need to approach things with a little bit more curiosity instead of that determined I know, and putting assumptions, because it brings our human element a little bit more into the conversation. So I'm excited to talk about curiosity and my journey with it with you, and with our
Wonderful.
listeners.
Wonderful. And so you are an engineering leader, right? For all of our listeners.
I am. I am an engineer. I started actually my career with computer science and applied mathematics, and computational engineering, and then dove into startups and cyber intelligence and cybersecurity, and a little bit more on gaming and fintech, etc. And I just recently ended my career at Google, and now I'm being curious about myself
Wow.
and my direction and where I want to go. So October was my last date at Google, and so we start something new, or nothing. So we'll let things emerge with curiosity.
That's wonderful. That your approach is so open to the unknown, because people find it very difficult to face with, and not
It
knowing.
is. It is a scary thing. It's 100 is, and I won't deny that sometimes I am terribly scared. Um, but I think often I ask myself, what is the alternative? Right? That's where we start. Like, when you've been working with yourself for a long time, you've mastered some core questions that you're always asking yourself. I was like, what is the alternative? So the alternative is to be in a corporate world that is dynamically changing, putting a lot of pressure on us, becoming a lot more toxic, versus exploring what's possible and what we can do with technology and assets and values that we curated over time. And where would that take us next?
That sounds fantastic, and I'm very happy for you. And kudos to you to making a bold move.
Yeah, just scary but bold.
Yeah,
Courage is
definitely.
the first value. Yeah, courage has been my grounding value. And then trusting the process, right? As women leaders, I think we take a long time figuring ourselves out and emerging into the leaders that we need to be for ourselves.
Definitely.
And it's the leaders that we need to be have always been inside of us. We're just allowing ourselves to accept and be that. And I think when we get into that graceful place of acceptance and knowing our strength, I think this is where this courage sometimes masks itself as daring, but it's still, the vulnerability is still there, the fear is still there, the questions are still there. But I come back into the stories that I've built through my life, and I was like, it worked before, it will work again. I have the skills, I have the energy, I have the power, and I want something different. But I'm not sure what that thing is.
Yeah, and you mentioned something. I know that we will talk about curiosity, but you mentioned something I think is very important, and that, as women, it takes us time to figure out who we are as leaders and accept ourselves.
Yeah,
And this is a topic I often talk about because we're different. I mean, each one of us is different, right?
yeah,
And
100%.
and
Yes.
for me personally, as a woman, as an introvert, as a quiet person, it was very difficult for me to accept myself as a leader because I doubted that I'm a leadership material so many times. Did it happen to you?
100%. I mean, in the beginning, I don't know, maybe it's an introvert saying, maybe it's a woman saying. I know a lot of other people in my life who also experience that. I think the main factor that I've explored is that oftentimes, and more women do this, we internalize things. When we internalize things, we push things down to ourselves, and we think we independently have to do everything when we don't. And actually, that's one of the stories. As I've been thinking about my journey with curiosity, one of the key stories that kind of ignited me on this path was a very similar thing. I was in grad school, and there is a lot of research that we needed to do on one of the projects. And some of it was research that was in computational engineering. So a lot of the research that was done was in German. And so there's still papers that are written in German and we have to translate to English. And so I I did a lot of research for hours and for days. And went and asked my German friends if they can help me with translating this because I'm not like an expert in German, but they're also not experts on engineering. So I took time, I created it, I did a really great presentation. And one of the students that was sitting in the presentation asked me if I borrowed the material and the papers, and why did I not include a couple of other papers from another colleague of ours who's a postdoctoral student. And I'm like, I never asked. I didn't ask. I just went off and did what I'm good at doing, which is like reading and researching. I never thought to ask someone else in my group if they had any of this research or if they had these papers translated. And that was a moment that like really lingered with me that week. And I was like, I was so deeply disappointed in myself for like not asking the question. It took a lot of work to get that presentation and to get the methodology together and the background for that paper. And where I could have asked a simple question to someone who's sitting next to me, right?
Yeah, this is something that I've experienced myself, and I see a lot of other women that I coach. We sometimes feel even either we don't think about it or we feel uncomfortable asking for help.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What was that moment for you like?
I think that throughout my career, I mean, even now, even today, I'll tell you something. I mean, it's think about who can help me. Rather, I try to do everything myself. And I
Mm,
think it kind of was with me throughout my career through, when I started coding. And yeah, it's not that I'd never ask for help, but it was always with difficulty because I felt
yes,
very
yes,
uncomfortable. Maybe it means I'm not good enough. Maybe everyone will see how, how much I don't know. And what does it say about me? Does it say that I'm not competent? So a lot
yeah.
of those thoughts were in my head, especially earlier in my career.
I see it very common even now that I've kind of stepped into a professor role, which has been really enjoyable for me. And I teach senior students, and we're working on web application. And I often tell them, if you're stuck, come and ask a question, because one of the immediate barriers I see with newbies to computer science and software development in general is that they don't ask questions. You introduce them to a huge code base
Yeah.
and you give them a bug and they go on for days when you know this bug is going to take like two minutes, right? If you would do it, might take 2 minutes. They go off on like 2 or 3 days and they don't come back and ask questions. And a lot of the factors you mentioned are key to that. And we don't want to seem stupid or we don't know enough. And they just hired me. So how can I do this? And it's so hard. I've done that. I've done that over and over. And sometimes I get stuck and do that and remind myself of like, what is my principle? What am I talking about? And how am I embodying my curiosity to show it to the next generation, right? And so it's tough to do it. It's tough to do it. But what I tell a lot of the new people on my teams is that I probably didn't give you all the information. The context is king, right? And
Yeah.
or queen, however you want to. Context is core to everything we do. So if you don't have enough context, how are you progressing on what you're doing, right? Do you have all the information you need? And in the workspace, your manager, your team is that support structure around you to give you more context, to build that knowledge for you. So just think sometimes have the ego or arrogance to uh, think that we will know everything or we should know everything is our worst enemy, right? This is where I believe like the core thing of being curious and being human with our curiosity is to humble ourselves into what else do I not know? And who can tell me what I need?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think it also goes the other way about what are the expectations that are being set in the environment you're at
Yes,
and how much psychological safety exists there. So if you ask a question and sometimes you may ask something that is maybe, I don't know, maybe trivial, maybe something you should have known, okay?
yes,
How is that going to be treated? Are you going to be judged by that? Are you going to be kind of, finger pointed at like, why are you asking this? You should have known that.
right?
So I think that that also goes a long way.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'll take you back to your childhood. As a
Yeah.
kid, were you a kid who asked a lot of questions?
Not really. I think I was not talking a lot. To be honest, I'm not much
Ah,
of a talker in general.
oh, I love that you're doing a podcast. I love
Yeah,
it.
which goes against my nature, right? But yeah, I'm not much of a
This-
talker in general. Also in my personal life, I'm more listen than talk.
Oh, I love that. I love the people who listen. I think they have the most interesting information, and they are curators of knowledge and wisdom in such a profound way. I used to be one of those kids who asked a million questions. And I think this is where I kind of a way of like I lost my curiosity a little bit because as a kid I would ask my mom, she's a teacher, both of my parents are educators. My I would ask my mom all the questions. They'd be in the kitchen, it's like, but why? But why that? And what happens if I do it this way? And why would that happen? And my mom is a mom of six, you know? And
Wow.
she's a beautiful, amazing, strong woman. And so one day I was asking her, maybe like I probably exceeded 20 questions. And she was busy. She had like an event happening or family coming over and preparing dinner. And she's like, go look at this encyclopedia. She gave me like some of my dad's encyclopedias, like, go read and then ask me one question. And so I think that's how my internalizing of the process became I'm going to go do my research and know everything I need to know before I come back and ask questions. That came up for me in that graduate school moment when I'm like, how come I didn't ask any questions? And it
Yeah.
put me on this path. It's like, I really don't ask many questions. I go and do a lot of work on my own, independently, like, a good independent little girl, who knows and wants to know everything, but I don't ask questions. And that is where I stepped back and had to evaluate how I want to move forward. And I wanted to be efficient. I wanted to build connection. And all of these things that I wanted were hidden behind me being curious. And so that put me on that trajectory of like curiosity is my best friend, is the principle I want to live by. And then I had to mutate and evolve and change it in so many different ways as I progressed in my career and in my leadership. Because, every place you get, you have to find a different way to get to the next place, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea of what got you here won't get you there. So, like, as a leader, the way we ask questions needs to evolve and change. And so I had to practice a different way of asking questions as a leader. So it's a wavy, it's a lot of questions to get where you need to be.
Yeah, and this is there's kind of a balance between how much you ask versus how much you go and figure out yourself, right? Because
Yeah,
you you want, especially when you hire people, you want them to be independent.
yeah,
And similar to your childhood story that you mentioned, like your mom was obviously very busy with six children, but But even if she wasn't super busy, like she wanted you probably to grow as an independent learner. So it's about balancing how much do you ask versus how much do you try to figure out yourself.
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
know that? Do you have like
Um,
an
you know,
opinion?
I do have an opinion, actually. A very strong opinion. And especially now. I mean, can you imagine with all the advances in technology and AI that we have? You could probably answer a lot of questions. But, using AI is not going to create that human connection, and
Yeah.
human wisdom and intuition is missing from that. But you can find data, right? I think there's a place of understanding the data and understanding the core principles that I expect from my interactions, I expect from myself before stepping in and asking deeper questions. Because then you bring in a level of knowledge and understanding that helps you achieve the goal that you want. Um, Stepping back is like, why do we ask questions, right? Or like, why do we acquire knowledge? And what makes us curious about things is we always have a goal to achieve, right? We
Yeah.
have vision, a direction, we have a project we want to accomplish. So, what are the basics of that space and that, you know, project that I should know, like, what are the fundamental basics of it so that my conversation with a project manager, with a project design team would be more informed, and we understand the language that we're speaking together. So I do believe that there is a place where we do the research and we hit the different, walls of like, oh, well, I don't know this, or like, how did they arrive at this conclusion? What made someone make this function this way, right? And so those places, you get your basic understanding, you hit that wall, and those wall questions is what I take over to my conversations with other people. Um, the feedback I get is like, oh, you did your research. They feel respected, they feel seen,
Yeah.
and we all want to feel seen. And, we all want to feel like we've done the work and other people are seeing and understanding what we're doing. And that's what questions reveal, right? The right questions will show you that I'm curious, I'm understanding, I want to know more about what you do.
Yeah, I love what you said about, they feel respected, they feel seen because you are putting the effort in getting to a certain level that will allow you to ask more thoughtful, relevant, and
Yeah.
intelligent questions.
Yes. This reminds me of in the early days of Google, when Google was becoming like a popular thing. Do you remember? Did you Google this? Kind of,
Yeah.
you get an animated game. It's like you could have just asked Google this question, or you could have Googled it instead of coming to me and taking 15 or 30 minutes of my time. And so you'd send that person a link that says Google this and show them how to Google something. Um, I've got it. I've got a couple of those asking about, like, how do I do testing in this type of project or something like that. I was like, yeah, I see you. I should do my research a little bit more before I step into a conversation.
Definitely. And I wanted to ask you about, so we talked about curiosity in the lens of, getting more knowledge and asking something you don't know. How did curiosity meet you as a leader of leading people?
Mm. Um, Lots of learning, lots of reflection. Because as a leader, you're expected to have a level of authority. Um, and sometimes that level of authority is diminished or undermined when you're asking questions. And engineers are the hardest audience. So as a leader and in engineering environments, of course, and I'm sure it's reflected in a lot of other fields, especially when you progress in your leadership level, is that we have this imbalance of like how women approach things and how women are seen, and how women's competencies are seen. So as a woman, in this engineering environment, which most of the time I'm the only one at a leadership level with all of the like 10 other guys, right, that are leading other
Yeah.
teams. When I ask questions, the assumption becomes, I don't know. It doesn't become, I'm challenging your knowledge and I want you to pause and think about it, right? And so I made those blunders a couple of times before I realized, like, oh, I really need to change the way I'm asking the question, especially to my direct reports, right? And so, many conversations later with a coach or a mentor, many conversations later with books, I came to the conclusion. I think my therapist was the best person who told me this. She was like, well, why don't you frame it as coaching? And so instead of just asking a question, I was like, you know what, guys, I'm going to put my coaching hat on for a second. I'm going to ask you a few questions so that we can like pause and think about how we're approaching this architecture,
I
right?
love
And I
that.
think this applies to so many other situations, especially for women, right? Because again, our competency when we ask a question is dismissed and we were like, oh, she doesn't know what she's doing. When you know exactly what you're doing, you're the, you know, domain expert on this, like you've built the product, right? And you're handing it over to another team. You know exactly what you're doing. So that was kind of like the approach that I took as I was transitioning more into higher leadership positions. And then at that time, I've kind of like was more grounded in my curiosity and in my knowledge and within myself to where everything I did after that was basically questions. How did you arrive to this, to this solution? What made you like, what are the decision points you made around this? How does this approach bring us closer to the vision we have for this product, right? What does it mean for us not to do X? So these become leadership questions that bring your team over and over. It's like, oh, I need to think about the vision. I need to think about my success metrics because, you know, my my manager is asking me about this. My VP of engineering is asking me these questions. I should know, right? So these become a space where you're allowing them to be curious, to connect with the mission and vision for the product, and to do the creative work without dictating or controlling how things are done, right? Because the opposite of curiosity is rigidness. And that rigidness is more of like, I am going to be controlling and tell you exactly how I want things to be, instead of opening a space for more creativity. Because when you hire smart people, they know what they want to do. They come from experiences that I didn't experience, right?
Yeah.
And so allowing them to explore that and be curious on how they arrive to these decisions and conclusions while continuing to guide them towards the why and how we want to accomplish something becomes the core way into accomplishing the work and being the curious, you know, safety creating, leader that you want to be.
I love that. First of all, I mean, the questions you asked earlier, I mean, I think our listeners can just start,
Yes.
copying them and use them because those are fantastic questions. And I think it makes also teams more motivated because they feel like, and I've seen that, especially with the younger generation. Because when I started my career, I was more, expecting someone to tell me what to do and be I guess I was more kind of respecting authority than I think the younger generations. It's
Yeah.
not that they don't respect at all, but they have less kind of, inclination to just listen to you because you're their manager. And
Yes.
that approach works wonders because it forces them to think. You challenge them by asking questions and
Yes.
kind of, trying to direct them to, okay, how is that going to achieve our vision? How is that going to achieve the goal? So you're kind of, challenging them yet encouraging them to think about that and come with solutions.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that is the heart of being curious, right? Is igniting curiosity in someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that you felt, oh, if I ask questions, they will think I don't know. And I think there are two parts here. I mean, one is about building the trust, right? When you, especially when you start managing people and they don't know you yet, they may be, suspicious, or they need to figure out who you are, how much do you know, especially as a woman, right? You already come at a disadvantage. Oh, this woman, what does she know? So I think it's building trust. Once you do that and you start asking questions, they will kind of, they already have the respect and they understand. Also, when they're used to that approach, they're used to the approach of like, I coach you, I more coach than tell you what to do. They will get
Yeah.
used to it and they will figure out that's actually the
Yeah.
better way to go.
Yeah, that's wonderfully said. I think the other side of it that I would also add is leaders who are curious are also open to thinking or to be shown that their thinking or what they're doing might not be right. Things are changing all the time,
Yeah.
right? We can't keep up with the amount of progress and change and tooling and, all of that. So being curiosity brings you to a place was like, if someone is able to show me that I am what I'm thinking or what I'm doing, it's not quite right, I will happily change. And it is one of the statements I also reinforce on my teams or people I have conversations with. It's like, you know, this is my opinion right now, but I reserve the right to change it. With new evidence and new technologies come along, I will change my mind. So if you have something to say or to show me that would change my mind, I am happily changing it.
Definitely. And usually women are much better at this in general.
I agree.
Because you have to put your ego aside. And I would even say that sometimes it's not about being right or wrong. It's about there are multiple ways of solving problems. I had a manager who challenged us as when I was an engineer, bring me 5 options to solve a problem. Because he wanted to encourage us to think openly and put
Mm,
our ego aside and understand that there is not one way that is the right way and others are wrong. And by being curious and being open to hearing maybe other options, it kind of, boosts creativity and innovation, and you hear different options and your option may not be the best, and that's okay.
yeah, yeah. So when you think about it that way, have you ever got into a place where knowing this innate truth about the nature of things, that there's many, many ways of doing things. Have you got into a place where that knowledge was crippling in deciding or being decisive on the direction you want to go?
I mean, that there are multiple options.
Yes.
I think the way it can be crippling, I don't remember like specific examples, but the way it can be crippling if you come into a discussion or a brainstorming session and now people bring ideas, which is great, but eventually you have to make decisions.
Yeah.
And then people can get kind of fighting head to head whose ideas is better. And that as a leader, you need to really figure out how can you create the team mentality. And it's about not just about individuals, but about the team and about, as you said, the vision. What are we trying to do here? And trying to help people loosen up their ego a little bit, because I've seen that a lot, and especially with men, right? More
Yeah.
men than women, that people are very kind of, married to their ideas, and it's hard for them to accept someone else. And then you have to
Yeah.
intervene and try to coach them and figure out how do we make a decision? how do we actually, it's not about who is right or wrong, it's about what's the best. And try to ask them like, okay, let's look at pros and cons and what is the best option for all of us right now based on our priorities and what we need to do.
Yeah, it's wonderfully said. As leaders, we have to evaluate a lot of choices all the time. And so in engineering, we have a lot of really great principles, like for just software development, right? Modularity, separation of concerns, Kaizen, like gradual improvement, etc. And that applies in these cases too. So I often like if we end up with like, do we go with this architecture or with that architecture? And we're split, like there's not a way. I go back to some core questions like, what is the price of going in this direction? Can we reverse back, right? Which one of them is more adaptable to the
Yeah.
time? What is the smallest decision that we can make right now without impacting future, anchoring
Yeah,
any future things? So then that gives the team and that gives you more time to explore
for
and
sure.
allow other things to emerge as well. And it's like, oh, I see. There are a few new things that now we know that we didn't know in the past, and that will lean towards architecture A versus architecture B. And I feel like this is a common scenario, but a lot of times we think about that perfect solution at the end of the way, like at the end of the road, and we want to accomplish that immediately instead of progressively creating incremental, progress, like over perfection, basically, is another way of saying it. And curiosity helps you navigate that, you know, path of which do I choose by asking better questions.
Definitely. And I think asking better questions is really a core leadership skill that every leader needs to develop. And it takes some
Yeah.
time, but that's a great skill when you have it.
Yes. Yes.
And Nisreen, I can't believe, we have been talking. Uh, this topic is fascinating. And before we end our call today, first of all, anything that is important for you to share that we haven't touched today?
Um, I think the core thing, whatever anyone takes from this conversation, I would say first understand your own values. Your values and being curious about yourself first and where you're coming from and what you want to achieve and what values and shadow values are operating in your consciousness or subconsciousness. That is the most important thing to be curious about because it is the core and foundation for your growth, for your trajectory and momentum towards your life goals. So know yourself first. Be curious
Definitely.
about yourself and then be curious about others.
Wonderful. And where can our listeners find you, Nisreen?
My name is very unique, so you can always find me on LinkedIn
Yeah,
as Nisreen Cane. Cane is Cain. I'm sure you can share my link with them. Right now, I am just starting a Substack called Beyond the Binary. Um,
wonderful.
and it is beyond the binary, like beyond the zeros and ones of like coding, more of like elevating our leadership experience and guiding new engineers and anyone who wants to understand life from my perspective. So you can find me in these spaces.
I will look you up in Substack because I'm relatively new on Substack and I love it. So I'll look you up
Awesome.
and subscribe to you.
Amazing. Yes. And if you subscribe to me, I'll go back and subscribe to you as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nisreen. It's been a pleasure.
It was a pleasure talking with you, Limor, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope the listeners enjoy this conversation. Take one little question home with them.
Definitely.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode with Nisreen. I hope it encouraged you to be more curious, and I want to ask for your support to share this episode with any woman that this episode is going to be helpful for. And I want to invite you to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcasting platform, and also check out my Substack, because I publish a lot of personal stories and my insights on episodes and not just on episodes. So it's limorbergman.substack.com. And before you go, I want to share with you my guest next week. And next week, we are going to talk about entrepreneurship. And the guest I have next week launched her own company. And the next morning after she launched her company, her father passed away in his sleep. And that moment really changed everything for her. And the guest is Virginia Frischkorn. And Virginia is a serial entrepreneur and founder of Party Trick. And as she described Party Trick as the Shopify for experiences, making event planning turnkey. And we talk about building businesses that actually mean something. Like, why most startups take longer and cost more than you think? The truth about scaling from 500,000 to multi-million-dollar events. Why relationships are the most undervalued asset, and how grief reshaped her mission as a founder. So if you're wondering whether you should start your own business or how to build something sustainable without burning out, I think this episode is going to help you. I highly recommend you to listen to this episode. So hit subscribe, share this episode with a friend who is building something bold, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.